They are vulnerable individuals who, for one reason or another, live lives well outside what many of us see as societal norms. They live on the street, often grapple with mental health issues, and sometimes find themselves incarcerated, only to repeat the cycle. Joining us now to detail what can be done to help, Teresa Schrader. She's founder and program coordinator at the Weerhofte Street Academy. Claire Haxel. She is senior manager at Vancouver's PHS Community Services Society. Pat O'Neill, paramedic with the City of Hamilton and Hamilton Police Services Social Navigator Project. Stephen Gates, director of Canadian Homelessness Research Network at York University. And Paula Gehring, who is an affiliate scientist at CAMH, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, and lead researcher on the Mental Health Commission of Canada's At Home Chez Soi study. And it's good to have 5 new guests in this studio tonight for what I trust will be an engaging and important discussion about some of the sorriest people in our society for whom I know you all spend many hours of your lives trying to figure out how to solve their problems. Let's start with some stats, because we want to get a sense, control room, if you would bring this up, we want to get a sense about what we're talking about tonight. The homeless in Canada are, of course, hard to count, but estimates range from anywhere of 150 to 300,000. Of that number, new data derived from Ottawa, Toronto, and Guelph shelter use estimate that the long-term homeless account for about 2 to 4% of that overall homeless population, but use between 26 to 39% of shelter beds. They are, on average, older than the rest of the homeless population, with more than 50% of them being middle or senior aged. And I want to start with just, Stephen, start us off here with some vocabulary. I hear chronic homeless, I hear hard to treat, I hear chronic offenders. What is the best language to use tonight to talk about the people we're talking about?
Well, I think the language of chronic homelessness is important because that's often how I think the public thinks about homelessness. That person that they see on the streets with a shopping cart who's been homeless for a long time. But the reality is, as you say with those stats, that's a small percentage of the homeless population. Most people who become homeless cycle in and out of homelessness within about a month. And then there's another group of people who have repeated episodes of homelessness. And then there's a group of people for whom homelessness becomes a long-term chronic problem. And it's important to understand when we talk about chronic homelessness, we have to get away from the idea that the problem is those people. The problem is how we deal with homelessness, right? That's the problem. If someone's homeless for a long time, we shouldn't be keeping them in that state. And the example I always use is if you think of a crisis like about 10 years ago, there was a big forest fire in the Okanagan, right? And you had 20,000 people displaced because of the fire. They were put into hockey rinks and local motels. Some were moved to other cities. Can you imagine if 10 years later we went back to Kelowna and there were still people living in hockey rinks? We'd say the problem is how we dealt with that crisis.
Not the people.
Not the people. And I think that's the issue with chronic homelessness.
Okay,
We've
Teresa,
allowed people to just stay in that state for too long.
Your clients, what do you call them?
Human beings.
Okay, of course human beings, but when you're in the course of doing what you do, which is basically rescuing people from these issues, what do you call them?
Usually I would refer to my clients as the marginalized population, people who have been pushed to the margins for whatever reasons. It could be income security, not having enough money to survive, lack of housing, addictions, mental illness, concurrent disorders. People that generally don't fit into the norms of society.
Do you know something about this issue beyond academic research?
I do.
Because?
Because I was homeless and living on the streets for more than a decade of my life. I was one of those people you'd probably walk by 10 years ago and say, oh, look at her, she's got no hope. She's always going to be out here. And I think that's why I got into the work that I do. I believe that there's very intelligent people living on the street, that each person has intrinsic value, and it's just working with that person on an individualized level rather than placing a stereotype or a judgment on them, and getting to know what their needs are and what they can contribute to society.
I don't want to pry, but you are here and I ask questions for a living,
yes.
Okay? How old were you when you first hit the streets?
18.
And why?
My mother and I had difficulties after my father passed away. We lived in extreme poverty and we had difficulties in the home, and at the age of 18, The toxic relationship ended and we parted our ways.
And you preferred to live on the streets, as it were, rather than under a roof that you might have to share with your mother?
The relationship was just not working at the time, so the streets was my option. And I lived in a small town that didn't have a lot of resources, so I found myself very transient, moving around. Eventually, I hit the capital city of Nova Scotia, which would be Halifax, and soon after that, I found a population of people that would love me and accept me for who I was, but that population of people was using drugs, and I joined them.
How'd you get out of it?
After many years, it didn't take long into my addiction before I realized I wanted to get out and I wanted to make a better life for myself, but it's getting yourself caught up in a cycle. So in 2006, I found out I was pregnant, and I really wanted to be a mom, so I accessed every service I could to get my life together and be a wonderful mom for my son Marcus, and he asked me if I could say hi. Hi, Marcus.
How old is he now?
He's 6.
He's 6 years old,
Yeah.
okay.
He's the love of my life.
I'll bet he is. I'll bet he is.
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. Claire, this is a story that so far seems to have a very happy ending. Mm-hmm. How atypical is that?
I don't think it's uncommon. As Stephen already pointed out, lots of folks experience homelessness for short periods of time. And that's what we try to do, certainly at the PHS, or I think anybody who's doing work in this field, is the goal is to rapidly house somebody as quickly as possible in housing that's appropriate for them. So sometimes that's going to be supportive housing, sometimes that's going to be independent housing with maybe a voucher to top them up so that they can live in regular housing. But that's the goal, is that rapid housing. Now, for some people, they're going to be more chronic, and they're going to have that longer time that they're going to need assistance. And in the downtown east side in Vancouver, that's the population that we're pretty consistently working with, and that's who we're, as an agency, are targeting. And these are people who are so marginalized, often they're not accessing to normal sort of shelters or services as it is. So they're coming through places like Insight, they're coming through outreach workers who meet them under bridges, and these are really the gateways into housing, which is the first step. You can't really tackle any of the other issues like addictions, like mental health, if you don't have the housing element first. It has to come first. And so that's what we do as an organization, I've been doing for 20 years.
Paula, I want to share with you an expression I heard. I was talking to a politician at Queen's Park once upon a time, and we were talking about the kinds of people we're talking about tonight, the chronically hard to serve, perpetually homeless. And the expression this politician used was, these are people for whom life is just not their thing. I don't think this politician meant to be cruel in saying that. I think he genuinely meant to be empathetic, that these are people for whom life is just not their thing, you know, like trying to live a normal life is just beyond them. Now, if he wasn't trying to be cruel, what do you think that says?
Well, I think it's a misunderstanding about a population for whom we oftentimes just don't understand. It's so far out of our own experience that we end up, making up explanations. And when you actually look at and talk to and try to work with this population, you find, for many of them, a resilience and a strength and a desire to make things better that is quite striking. I spent a long time working in psychiatric hospital with people with mental illness who were institutionalized. And when I started working with people on the streets, I realized that they, in many ways, have a lot stronger character and a lot more desire to engage with life. They're much less passive in many ways, of people who choose to just be dependent and live in the institution.
Okay, that goes against type. So give me an example of how that might have manifested itself. That never mind that life was not their thing. They actually wanted to engage more with life, but may have had trouble doing so.
Well, I think Teresa should answer that question.
Okay. You want to help me out on that one?
Do you want to pose that question to me again so I can give it my best?
She suggested that these weren't people who'd given up on life, that they're actually very engaged with life, but living life is harder for a whole bunch of reasons.
Living life on the street is a lot harder because there's no reward system for yourself. Sometimes you don't even have a clock. But the one common denominator I find about including myself and the clients that I work with, people are incredibly resourceful. People are incredibly, they have survival mechanisms that the average person would not have. And a different kind of intellect. You have to navigate through so many agencies, red tape, getting services here, there, and everywhere. It's like you're a navigator yourself. And you have to be resourceful and knowledgeable to get around and get the things that you need in order to survive.
Pat, tell me this. How do you come into contact with this very hard-to-serve population?
Well, I think we should back up just to how the Social Navigation Project became and evolved. Chief Glenn DeCare.
This is in Hamilton.
This is in Hamilton.
You do in Hamilton.
Yeah, this is actually a Hamilton police initiative. So.
And despite what you look like, you're actually not a cop.
No,
we should
I'm
just
not.
establish that.
No, I'm a paramedic. Yeah.
Although the uniform and the badge and the whole, I mean, you're looking like a cop.
Easy, Steve. It's
Okay.
Maybe I'll get some navigation for you. How's that? So I think one of the key things I like to talk about with the program is that it evolved from an understanding that police were having a great deal of interaction with individuals on the street and the homeless. I do work with the homeless, but I also work with those who are housed. And my sense of the marginalized group is just not homeless. That is individuals that can be just by the being of their involved with the mental health system or in addictions and stuff. But what transpired was the action strategy, which was an implementation funded by PAVIS. If you're familiar with PAVIS, it established areas that were very high crime areas, but
I think in Toronto we call it TAVIS.
Yeah, you
so
do.
It's
yeah,
PAVIS
it's
where
PAVIS
you are.
provincially and then TAVIS in Toronto. So what they found is that the officers were dealing with individuals on a very repetitive basis, and what could happen, how could these folks be referred to agencies within the community? And it was a way of which for the police to refer to services within the community. My role really is to ensure that those services are connected with. So I'll work with the shelters, I'll work with the various agencies. But yeah, I see them on a very daily basis.
Okay, so how much does interaction with police and or first responders, et cetera, form of the daily reality of the people we're talking about?
Oh, it forms a great deal of reality. I mean, if you're involved in a criminal activity, there could be aggressive behavior, that you're panhandling. There could be the fact that there could be a complaint from a business and the police have to respond to that particular complaint. So the reality is, yeah, the police are involved with dealing with many of the individuals that the panel is talking about and experience.
Stephen, is there any way to know what percentage of the people we're talking about tonight are the people that, quote unquote, the rest of society fears because they're aggressive, they're potentially involved in crime, versus the other homeless people who are the people we see lying on the sides of streets during the daytime and really aren't harmful to anybody else?
Well, it's important to talk about that because public perceptions are quite powerful, and there's lots of research that shows that a high percentage of the general public thinks people who are homeless choose to be homeless, that they're lazy, they don't want to work, that they're criminally involved, and there is a percentage that is criminally involved, right? But for the most part, they're not. But what the problem is that when we don't address homelessness by housing people, we make homelessness visible, right? We force people out onto the streets, into public spaces, parks, street corners, and the public gets afraid, right? And then they start to ask the government to do something. So when the Safe Streets Act was instituted in Ontario in 2000, Jim Flaherty, who was the Attorney General at that time, said, when the public is afraid to walk down the streets or drive their cars, it's time for government to act. And that's actually a totally mistaken notion, right? If I'm afraid of somebody because of the way they look, the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, the government has no obligation to do anything about my fears and paranoia.
Can I push back on this a bit? What if you're a woman alone at 10 o'clock at night driving in a car and somebody comes and knocks on your window, and this is clearly a person who looks like a homeless person? A woman is entitled to feel threatened and fearful in that circumstance, is she not?
Well, I mean, we have people we walk in public spaces all the time where there are people that I might be afraid of, right? There's lots of reasons why I might be afraid of somebody. We can't respond based on that because that's a slippery slope. And the other thing to know about people who are homeless is that we focus on them as, it is they that we should be afraid of. They are the dangerous ones. But the research shows that they are overwhelmingly victims of crime, right? The rates of by strangers, passersby, sometimes other homeless people, but the rates of criminal victimization across, all crime categories, whether it's robbery, assault, sexual assault. We did a study where we found that amongst young homeless women, 38% had been sexually assaulted in the previous 12 months. 38%. If that was my neighborhood, there'd be troops on the streets, right? There are really high levels of crime against people who are homeless, and that's not how we tend to talk about crime in relation to homelessness.
Let me ask Pat about that. Do the cops care about homeless crime?
Oh, I think so,
It's not just
yeah.
homeless on homeless, though.
But you mentioned that as part of the equation
It
here.
could be, but it's also strangers. If you do the work, you know that there are lots of people out there. It's easy to prey on someone who's homeless,
Okay,
right?
so let me ask the follow-up. Do the police care as much about a crime against a homeless person as they do against someone who's middle class living in a nice house?
Oh, I believe so.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, because, I think that there's a couple things I want to address, first of all. With respect to aggressive paneling, the individuals that I've navigated have all had housing. They've all had housing.
Okay.
They're not homeless. So I think the point that Steve has raised is that the perception is that a lot of the times the behavior you might be seeing in the street is not necessarily a homeless person.
Right.
I have, in this program, we've begun to court mandate people into this program through the court system. And those individuals that are court mandated all have addresses. So I think that's a very interesting point about the perception that people have regarding the homeless. And it's interesting you talk about, or I think Paula talked about the resilience. Many of the homeless too really are couch surfing.
Are what?
Couch surfing.
What does that mean?
Means they're hanging out with a friend. So they might know somebody who has some kind of lodging or housing, and they will go and stay there. So they'll find some type of resource to get off the street. They're not stupid. They figure out that winter is cold, and they understand that they've got to take some kind of action. But getting back, if I could just one point, sure. I think the police do care, and I've seen an empathy and a compassion. Certainly the role of the police is an enforcement, but that's not without some understanding of what needs to be done from a social level.
Sure. Claire.
I was just going to follow up. I think that on 2 points really. One, the sort of couch surfers. We were involved in some research in 2010 that showed, coming out of St. Mike's, looking at homelessness across Canada, and the couch surfer we sort of termed as vulnerably housed. So somebody who's they could be staying in a shelter or staying at a friend's or have moved many times in the past year. And we found for every person sleeping on the street in Canada, there's at least 23 other people who are vulnerably housed, which moves that number of sort of kind of homeless up to almost 300,000 people in Canada.
Can I just make sure I understand that? So they don't have their own address, but they got a roof over their head.
They've got a place to stay.
But it could end tomorrow.
Could end tomorrow, exactly. So vulnerably housed. And that population are experiencing the same health and social issues as those folks who are sleeping on the street, have the same lack of access to health care, struggling to find food. So the problem is really large, even though we tend to kind of focus on the old man with the shopping cart when we think about homelessness.
Well, okay, you're going to forgive me, but I do want to focus on that guy for a second. I want to focus on that 2 to 4%, as we had it in the chart at the beginning, who are the most perpetually difficult to serve, chronic, etc. And I want to find out from you, Paula, is addiction virtually always involved in that 2 to 4%?
Not always, but it is a higher prevalence in the high user group than it is in the rest of the population. And I believe in our high user group, in the study that we're doing across the country, where we have over 2,000 people that we've been following for 2 years, some of which are housed and some of which are not.
Where are these 2,000 people?
They're in 5 cities across Canada, so they're in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, and Moncton.
Okay.
And the high user group has a higher rate of substance abuse in our population than those who are not using a lot of services. And I can't remember the exact figures, but my hunch is that it's closer to 60% instead of 40% in the population.
Although when I said the 2 to 4%, how are they all addicted to something? I saw your head go like this right away. So you're not buying that addiction is almost always a factor here?
I'd almost say mental illness more than addiction.
Or brain injury.
Or brain injury.
Brain injury,
But
yeah.
Paula's point is that it's maybe higher than the general public, but that's not the same as saying everybody is. The Paula's study, I think we should talk more about, because it gets at some of the myths we have about homelessness, that people want to be homeless or that they've given up on life or whatever. And you know what you find with Housing First and the research, you can take the most hardcore long-term homeless person. If you give them housing and the right supports, they stay housed, right?
Yeah.
They stay housed, and their health generally improves. Their involvement with police declines, right? So, like, there's an important lesson there, right? And this is what you said, right? We should be housing people first.
You know what? I got the stats here. Can I read these?
Sure.
Let's bring this up, because we're on the issue of housing right now. So let's bring up the numbers here. Beyond the human cost, obviously, that we've talked about tonight, there are real economic costs. For example, in 2006, a shelter bed at $1,900 plus per month is certainly cheaper than a provincial jail cell at more than $4,000 or a hospital bed at almost $11,000. But all of these are way more expensive than stable housing through either a rental supplement at $700 plus or social housing at just under $200. And to put that in context, according to data collected by the City of Calgary a few years ago, the annual cost of supports including healthcare, housing, and emergency service for a transient homeless person is just north of $72,000, while for a chronically homeless person, it's $50,000 more at $135,000 almost. Okay, what do we infer from these numbers here, Teresa? You look at these numbers and what do you take from this?
I'm going to be blatant. I think we've built a whole industry around the poor. And I'm not excluded. I work as a social service worker right now, and my job depends on people being homeless, people being marginalized, people needing support. But we have built a whole industry, right from paramedics to emergency rooms to jail guards to social workers to housing workers, outreach workers. If we were to end the homeless problem across Canada, how many jobs would we lose?
Are you saying that we don't want to end homelessness because we've got too much skin in the current game?
I believe so. I believe we have the resources and the faculties to end homelessness or significantly decrease homelessness. Yeah. But there's too much invested in the solution in different ways, if you could understand.
It's also, I think, again, it comes back to the prejudices that people have. Though I think people feel, you know, if people are choosing to be homeless or they're bad people or whatever, then, you know, shelters and day programs and soup kitchens, that may not be nice, but that's the best we can do. And I think, you know, if people knew more that that's actually really expensive, right? That when you keep people in a state of homelessness, it's expensive because their health worsens, their chance of running into trouble with police increases, that there are all those external things that happen when you're homeless. It costs a lot of money.
Well, let me get clear on that. I want you to react to what Teresa just said, that there are too many people invested in the status quo, and therefore there's no incentive to find a solution to homelessness.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily agree with that. But part of, I guess, why is because, and I think it is happening though, is that we have particularly a federal government, but different levels of government, who it's really about choice. We could choose to end homelessness. Yep. We could choose to end hunger. We could certainly choose to end child poverty in Canada. But we have a federal government that has chosen to invest money in jails instead of in housing and instead of in childcare and early childhood education, all of the things that we know prevent homelessness long-term down the road. The work from Stephen's organization and crime. We have the answers, and I don't think it's that systemically Canadians don't want to help the homeless. I think that Canadians, it's part of a Canadian psyche, is to want to help. It's something I think Canadians can be quite proud of. But I do think that our politicians, particularly our current federal politicians, take an ideological choice to say, well, this is a population that we don't care about. It's their own fault. They're playing up on those stigmas, that preconceived notions about it's a choice. They could just choose not to be that way. Why don't they just get a job? And they're lazy. Those are not the Canadians that we're going to help. And I think that's what
I want to hear from Pat and then Paula on that. What do you think?
Well, listen, I'm not a policy expert per se in the housing and homeless, but I think my experience is that, yeah, we want to help these folks get tied into service. My job is really to get these folks tied to those social services in some way and to close the gap. For me, this is more about how do I connect to the systems that are already existing. If there's deficits in the system, then I think that's another discussion that perhaps we don't have time for today. But my idea is that I don't care who they are. If they're referred to me, whether they're homeless or not, or they're in a transient situation, I'm going to work to make sure that they are access the services, whatever we have.
Okay, but Paula, do you ever say to yourself, boy, I sure hope we don't solve homelessness because then I'll be out of a job? Because that's sort of what I think I hear Teresa saying.
I think there's some truth to what Teresa is saying in that we do, in our attempts to be helpful to people, get stuck in certain ways of doing things. And then and we define ourselves as being helpful in those ways, and it's hard sometimes to imagine that maybe that's not the best way to do things. And I think that that's where we are in some ways now with this population, which I wish we wouldn't call them hard to serve.
What do you want to call them?
I want to call them evidence of our system failure. Because I think it's the problem of what we've been trying to provide as much as it is whether they're willing, it's not what they need. Oftentimes is what we're providing, and in particular, we're not providing that immediate access to housing of their choice so that people can begin to be responsible for themselves.
Okay, but when I hear evidence of system failure, that suggests to me that it's all the rest of our fault and they have no responsibility for their predicament.
No, I don't mean to suggest that. I think it's, it's never that black and white. Mm-hmm. But I think if you look at how we've designed our homeless system, we've put so much investment in shelters. That's where the bulk of our dollars are going, at least on the housing side of it. And those shelters become homes for people. These people are cycling through shelters. They go from one shelter, they're kicked out because there's a time limit. They go to another shelter. It doesn't make any sense. They're expensive.
Yeah, but we need them.
We need shelters, but we need them for short-term emergency housing.
That's right. I mean, the shelter should be there to deal with the emergency, the crisis that happens. It's not meant to be permanent housing.
No, I agree with you, but I think that the intent, the problem is that it's also where the individual is thinking too. I mean, sometimes it's, my experience is that the shelter system is actually the best situation for the person, even up to a 6-month, depending on what they're dealing with within their own situation. There are, I mean, I can think of a number of people who, in the absence of having a permanent home, needed the shelter for that period of time. The issue is not, to me, the shelter, it's what the shelter can access outside and where are the barriers outside the shelter system. I mean,
There's two things that we need to provide for people. We need to provide immediate access to housing of their choice. And it's important to talk about choice, not just housing, but where do people want to live? And then they need to provide supports that can help them deal with the problems they choose to deal with in order to keep their housing. And that's basically what we've been doing in this study, and we've compared what happens when you do that to what happens when you leave people in the system as it is currently designed. And we get lots better outcomes.
And this is important, right? Like, we have to base our response to homelessness on what the research tells us, what the evidence is, and that's it. I mean, I have to say, shelters, we're always going to need shelters because bad things are going to happen to people, but I don't think 6 months is reasonable.
What should it be?
I think places like in Calgary, right, they're making the target that it should be like 7 days, right? Get people into housing. Because again, that person that you think is so difficult, the housing is important. If you've ever been in a homeless shelter, you'll understand that, it's important to think, would that be okay for me to live in a building or a room with 18 other people, 5 of whom I know who I'm afraid of? The rest I don't know. The person beside is coughing on me. I'm worried about someone stealing my shoes, so I wear them at night. Why would someone want that instead of having their own place? Right? We have to treat people with dignity and start with what would you or I want? And the evidence shows that when you take people who are homeless and put them in housing and give them the supports they need, they do much better. Right? And that's where we should be operating.
Claire, is that even with the 2 to 4%? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and I think what that housing is going to look like might be a little bit different for that 2 to 4% than for the person who's experiencing their first bad moment and their first time in experienced homelessness. And I think that's some of the research from the At-Home Chez Soi project, and on the front line we certainly see that people need different things. What we know what they need is it needs to be decent. It can't be shabby, rundown buildings. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be subsidized or topped up, and it needs to have the appropriate kinds of supports. So it could be a scattered site model where folks are living anywhere in the city with a rental supplement. It could be in a congregate setting where they have a nurse and a case manager that works there every single day. And then even the people who are out in scattered sites, some are going to need help every day. They're going to need a social worker visiting them. Other folks, just once a week, once a month.
You know what? You mentioned this At-Home Chez Soi project, and we got a clip from this here. And well, this is the National Film Board. So let's you know about this? Yeah. This is your thing. Okay, here's a guy named James L., who's a housed participant in the project in this documentary. So let's have a look, and then we'll chat. Roll tape, please.
I'd rather be back on the street because I understand the street better than living indoors. Living outdoors, you're completely free, you're independent, and life is as you make it day by day. It's more honest and honorable. Because once you're indoors, you start having all the syndromes of modern industrial society. Living indoors, you grow soft right away.
Okay, gang, did he just contradict everything you just said?
I think that's, one can always find, there are some people who will want to be homeless, but that's a really small percentage. You can cherry pick an example that's going to paint the picture that supports your prejudice. But the reality, again, the evidence is really, really strong that people want to be housed, and they do better when they're housed.
Prejudice is a fairly harsh word. This is a clip from a document. This is a clip from a National Film Board documentary.
No, but we always select images. That's how prejudice works. We find images that support our ideas, our preconceived notions, right? So there's a lot of clips on that NFB site, right? And the one you picked is of somebody who's saying that. There's lots of other clips there that talk about people saying, yes, this is great, things have stabilized, life is better.
Claire?
Well, I also think that you've got to take the long view when you're looking at homelessness. That the At-Home Chez Soi project is a 2-year project. This gentleman's obviously not young. He's probably had a long history of homelessness. He's from Moncton, maybe even spent some time in more rural settings, living really out in the bush.
From Toronto, actually.
The adjustment, maybe from Toronto, you can still live in the dawn. Immediately coming into housing, it is a really hard transition for folks, but particularly people who aren't used to being alone, they're not used to having a roof over their head. It takes a while to adjust. Doesn't mean that his health isn't better, doesn't mean that his police involvement hasn't gone down, and doesn't mean that he's not accessing services. It might not be the perfect situation for him right now, but I think we can agree that it's better than being homeless.
Okay, so Teresa, let me ask you, if in the midst of that decade that you were homeless,
Yes.
somebody came to you and said, there's a home right over there, it's got your name on it, we got services to help you make it all happen, what would you have said?
I would have went for it.
You'd have gone for it.
Yeah, I was what I considered vulnerable. I can't even talk right now. Vulnerably housed.
Vulnerably.
Yeah,
That's the word.
vulnerably. I don't know why I can't talk right now. I was an addict, so I used to jump from place to place to place, wherever the bag ended of dope.
That's my point, though. If somebody had come to you,
I would have done it.
You say you would have done it, but you were addicted. You were on stuff. Would you have been in any condition to make a logical decision at that point about your life?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Even if you were addicted?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's not like I've lost my faculties. I had an addiction.
To what?
Cocaine. And every day I knew who I was, where I was, what I was doing, and dreamed of the day where I'd be able to get my life together and have housing.
Okay, Paula.
Yeah, well, we've just done this across the country. We've gone and offered, and we don't have people turning us down or, very few regretting their decision. Now, this gentleman is a very unusual case, and I wish you could see the whole clip.
He actually hasn't left his home yet either, for what it's worth.
No, he stayed, and if you see his support worker interacting with him around his health, you realize that he wouldn't survive if he were on the street. So he has this idea in his mind about it being more honorable and honest, but in reality, he needs to be where he is, and he's staying there, and he's appreciating what he's getting. So it's, and that's typical.
And I think another good point too is that once you are housed and you have a worker, and for the first time you can start dealing with some of the reasons why you were homeless. Maybe it was an addiction, maybe it is trauma, mental health, other things that have come up over the course of your life. For the first time, you have the space to face it. And that can be really scary for folks and can be triggering and hard to maintain their housing. So I think it's important when we're talking about people kind of regretting their housing, it's not so much that. I think, at least in my experience, it's more that folks are suddenly coming to terms with, oh my God, this is my life. How did this happen?
I should, just so I don't get you mad at me for the rest of the program, I should say that you're right. There are a panoply of different cases on the National Film Board site, and people can go to the, what is it, nfb.org or something like that? Hillary, do you know? I'm asking Hillary.
It's called Here at Home on the NFB.
On the NFB. So go to the NFB site, and it's Here at Home Chez Soi. And there are different cases with different experiences. And yes, the one we played, I know. But
well, I want to say something about the addiction issue too. One of the things you have to recognize is that homelessness produces certain kinds of negative outcomes, right? A lot of people will self-medicate. I've never been homeless, but I have to say, I imagine that if I was, I would be drunk or stoned all the time, because it's dangerous, it's hard, it's scary, and I'd want to take away the pain, right? So you see that homelessness can produce that. It can also lead to more mental health issues due to trauma, more brain injury, so like it creates these other problems that we then attribute to the person, not to the fact that they've been homeless.
I hear you, but what you seem to be saying to us is, despite what James L. says about his preference to actually live on the street where he feels freer and more able to adapt to the world he lives in, we shouldn't believe what he says.
No, I'm saying that some people are going to have different opinions, right? And there are some people who perhaps prefer to be on the streets, but what I was saying is that it's a small percentage. I think your point and your point too, that we're talking about different individuals with different needs, different stories, but if you take the group of people that we're talking about here as a whole, they thrive if they get housing. It makes taking care of the other issues more possible. The crime drops, the health improves, and it can lead to these kind of outcomes. It can be slow, and it can be difficult because people are adjusting to the new circumstance.
One of the themes, we do qualitative interviewing as well as have people answer questions on surveys, and one of the themes that comes out of the qualitative interviewing is the question of safety. And just how important it is for people to have a place where their belongings and themselves can have some privacy and some safety. And the contrast. The average amount of time for the individuals in our study that they've been homeless is 5 years. And for some, they've never had a place at all, ever. Because becoming homeless at a young age, as Teresa did, is also fairly common. And then it just becomes something that people are trapped in.
So how do you want to make this happen?
Changing the world so that we have more housing first.
You think this whole range of problems that we're talking about tonight, the first and best thing we can do to end them is to get this, what did you call them? You don't like my calling them hard to serve or chronically homeless or whatever the right expression is.
You have to talk about persons with.
Persons with, okay.
Not the homeless.
Or persons without homes.
Yeah.
Get them into homes first, and then all the other solutions come along, right?
Well,
so how do you want to do that?
Okay, so I don't want, it's not just housing only.
But it's housing first. Got it.
Okay, because you got to have housing first, and then whatever kind of supports people need to actually work on the problems that they've got.
So how do you make this happen?
Well, right now, what we're suggesting and what we're hoping is going to happen is that the policies need to shift and the funding needs to shift. So that what we're doing is taking all this money that we're putting into emergency services and inpatient services and police and shelters, and instead investing it in housing and supports. And that's what we all need to figure out to do. And actually, it's very encouraging in Ontario. Our project ended March 31st, and the government of Ontario has decided to pick up the programs that we had funded as a part of the demonstration and to make them permanent programs. So the individuals that we housed and the supports we're providing are now going to be a part of the Ontario system.
Which is how many people?
Toronto. That's about 250 people.
250 down,
A lot.
299,500 to go, eh, or something like that?
no.
No?
We
I don't mean to poo-poo it, but I'm
Yeah.
saying,
We
drop in the bucket?
are learning about how to do this in a more coordinated way. In the province of Alberta, I think they've made the best headway in Canada. And so what they do is they do these integrated systems approaches that involve the police and the healthcare system and that. They orient the whole system to a housing first philosophy. So the shelters have to be paying attention to that as their job. They focus on prevention, and they emphasize housing first through everything they do. They invest in affordable housing, right, so that there's more housing supply. And you know, this isn't just a radical experiment. There's producing results. Edmonton has had a 30% drop in homelessness since 2008. Lethbridge, 65%. Calgary, 12%.
because they have committed to this
because
formula.
they have committed to this formula. So what we need to do, right, like the good ideas are there. What we need to do is scale them up and make sure that people are doing it in different places.
Well, and I think the elephant in the room there is that they have a strategy and a plan, and it's not just individual organizations or research projects just happening willy-nilly. And I think should be no surprise to anybody that when the federal government got out of housing in the early 90s, it only took 10 years before the mayors declared a homelessness crisis in all the cities across Canada.
Okay, I'm not going to sit here and speak on behalf of the federal government, but I do know how to read the Constitution, and my hunch is that governments read the Constitution and they say, housing is a provincial responsibility, and the federal government has no constitutional mandate to be in it.
Actually, the Constitution, the federal government does for housing. For lots of other things they don't, but it is in the Constitution that they do for housing.
You got to show me that. You got to show me that, because I've read Section 91 and 92.
No, this is true, right? And so what we need is all levels of government engaged in it, right? And that hasn't always happened. We've had a little bit of federal government depending on the province, federal government, and then the municipalities have been carrying the can for the most part. The provinces have to be more engaged, and we also have to remember First Nations, right? There are more than just 3 levels of government in Canada. And so the place, as you were saying, the places that make the biggest strides move away from just thinking about individual agencies or services, but how do you integrate the response so that everybody's pulling in the same direction, right? And the evidence is there that it works.
I think that's what our program's doing. I think we're trying to pull in. Can I just get back to this idea about housing first? I think I'm going to be the black sheep in the room, so to speak. I actually don't agree. I think the first thing that comes first is the person's insight into their own issue. I think that my experience with individuals, unless they are prepared to engage and where I really emphasize in this context of navigation or systems, what is the relationship with your primary health provider? And so the discussion has to begin about the medical issue, because what I have seen is that addiction and homelessness usually come from are a result of mental health issues. That's where I see it. And so there's a need, I think, to connect to primary health first, start a discussion with the primary health provider if that's in the shelter system. Hamilton has the Shelter Health Network, which is really great. You have doctors all across the shelters and in facilities where you're meeting the vulnerability of individuals. And then begin that discussion about housing. There are people that are just not ready to accept housing at this point, and are not ready.
Paula's shaking her head.
Not what we found. It's not what we found. We went and asked, and we gave it to them.
You can speak to your research. Let me speak to my personal experience from there. Okay. There was a gentleman in Hamilton that was referred into the program, and chronic psychotic state, and we navigated him into the shelter health to begin a relationship with a physician, and subsequently there was a referral to an agency that would give case management. And yes, it's important for him to have housing, but you have to be careful where you go, because when I listened to what this individual was doing in the housing setting, definitely wasn't ready. So I think that...
So no point putting him in a house if he's
that's right. And
utterly incapable of...
Utterly incapable. And so, I mean, yes, we do need to have housing. I think there are all sorts of... But I think, first of all, it comes down to that relationship with the primary health provider first, having an insight that that individual reaches so that they can move into housing.
Paula, doesn't it make common sense?
Well, it sort of does, but that's what we were talking about earlier. That's how we've set up our system. We have lots of conditions that people have to meet before they're ready. So housing readiness.
It's not a condition. I think it's just some common sense here.
Well, there are individuals who will not be able to have a relationship with a primary care provider, but who need to be off the street and in housing and will choose to do that. And if they're willing, in our study, the only thing we asked of them was that they allowed somebody to come and visit them once a week, just to check on them. We didn't require them to have a relationship. We didn't require them to accept help. We just required that we had to be able to see what was going on there. And that was it. That's no preconditions. You don't have to clean up. You don't have to get treatment. You don't have to have relationships. And it is working. It is working.
Okay, let me jump in here because we got 2 minutes to go. And having talked about the people you serve, I want to spend 2 minutes talking about you guys. And I want to know, Teresa, this is very hard work that you're all engaged in with some of the most, you'll forgive the expression, hard to serve people in our society. What keeps you going?
The program I run is an educational-based program to help people find permanent solutions to poverty and rid themselves of poverty, much like I did. So what keeps me going is seeing my clients succeed. Like, I have people that I've worked with that are attending college right now. I have a girl who's on the dean's list 2 semesters in a row, who was hard to serve a few years ago. She's doing fantastic. She needed people to believe in her, for her to believe in herself, and now she's soaring across the sky. So how could I not be delighted?
What keeps you going?
I don't know. I guess it's just there's such an overwhelming need. It just doesn't seem like, why would you stop?
Seems rude to stop. Eh?
Yeah, well, I guess so. It's just, I can't think of anything else I would do.
Paula?
Well, I've had such an opportunity to work with people who are on the front line and the participants in this study, and it's been very gratifying because they are a very unique group of people, and
that's the best description. Let's just leave it there. I want to thank Teresa Schrader from Via Hafta for being on our program tonight, Claire Haxel from Vancouver's PHS Community Services Society, Pat O'Neill from the great city of Hamilton, Ontario, Paula Gehring, CAMH, Stephen Gates, York University. Great discussion, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.